Hello everybody, my name is Ensign Rickey, your YouTube resident redshirt, and welcome back to the Lower Decks. In today's video, I will be continuing on with my Ensign's review series. I will be both breaking down and discussing the creation behind my favorite sci-fi show of all time, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. On a personal note, these are the reviews I've been waiting to do for a very long time. In this video, I will give you a quick understanding into what I consider to be Star Trek's best series in terms of quality and concept. So, without further ado, I present to you the Star Trek Deep Space Nine series intro.
Mission, and it's likely one of us will be killed. The landing party will consist of myself, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Ensign Rickey. Ah, crap.
Deep Space Nine has always been a controversial topic in the Trek community amongst fans and critics. At the time of its creation, Deep Space Nine was an early adopter and pioneer of what we view as commonplace in television today: serialized television story arcs. Many people have just labeled Deep Space Nine as a show that had a too dark and gritty theme for a Star Trek Roddenberry universe. In my opinion, this show broke many boundaries. Deep Space Nine evolved Star Trek in a lot of other ways that the other Star Trek shows just couldn't. Not to mention that Deep Space Nine has been getting a lot of media attention lately with the release of its upcoming documentary, What We Left Behind. This is a documentary that was kickstarted by the show's creators and ultimately funded by fans. Now with that all out of the way, let's dive right into it. Welcome to Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The conception. With the astounding success of Star Trek The Next Generation about to enter its 5th season, talks of a new Star Trek show were on the rise. Gene Roddenberry had proved to all the negative critics that he could indeed make lightning strike twice in the same place. But all the years of hard work and even harder partying had taken its toll on Roddenberry. As a result, his health started to rapidly decline. On October 24th, 1991, at the age of 70, right before the creation of Deep Space Nine, Gene Roddenberry, the great bird of the galaxy, had died. The proverbial keys to the Star Trek franchise would then fall in the hands of Rick Berman and Michael Piller, and then later on down the line, Jerry Taylor. This would be the start of what they called the Berman era of the Star Trek franchise. Jerry Taylor became the executive producer for Star Trek The Next Generation. This would give Rick Berman and Michael Piller the time to step away and begin the creation of the new series. Michael Piller would bring back alumni TNG writer and fellow showrunner Ira Steven Behr into the fold to work on the new series. The end result would be Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and the rest is Star Trek history. Paramount Pictures, the company who owned Star Trek at the time, was wildly opposed to the idea of producing a new Star Trek series. Star Trek V was a huge and expensive failure at the box office, and Star Trek VI was having production troubles. The company added that it was still in many legal battles with a handful of Gene Roddenberry's lawyers concerning Star Trek's rights. Paramount greatly expressed that they wanted nothing to do with Gene Roddenberry or Star Trek at all. And then in 1991, the landscape of Paramount Pictures had changed, as its leadership had changed hands over to a man named Brandon Tartikoff. Brandon Tartikoff was a top television executive, and at the time, Tartikoff was larger than life in that era of television. Originally hired by NBC in 1981, Tartikoff was hired to oversee NBC's television division. NBC at the time was in shambles. The company was in last place versus its competitor giants, ABC and CBS, and the very future of the company was in doubt. Brandon Tartikoff, along with partner Grant Tinker, turned the company around into a booming success. Tartikoff, in turn, would become the company's youngest president ever of its entertainment division. Tartikoff was credited with such shows as The Cosby Show, Seinfeld, Cheers, The Golden Girls, Law & Order, Family Ties, Knight Rider, and Miami Vice. Tartikoff himself would also cameo in these shows, playing small parts or sometimes even himself. Unfortunately, 6 years after being hired at Paramount Pictures, Tartikoff would eventually lose his struggle with Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. Brandon Tartikoff would die in 1997 at the relatively young age of 48 years old. Now back to the story. Now that Tartikoff was at the helm of Paramount Pictures, he set up a meeting with Rick Berman and Michael Piller to discuss the creation of a new series. Tartikoff himself already had an idea for a show. He wanted it to be a space show, but he wanted the theme to be like a version of The Riflemen in Space. He wanted the premise of the show to be about a father and son going around in space righting wrongs. Berman and Piller asked if it could be a Star Trek show. Tartikoff expressed he didn't care what kind of show it was. This meeting would become the fundamental basis of what we know today as Star Trek and Deep Space Nine. As soon as the idea was greenlit, Berman and Piller began building the story and the concepts for the new series. Piller, now hiring staff for the new Star Trek series, set up a meeting with former Star Trek alumni Ira and Stephen Bear. Ira, who had worked on earlier seasons of The Next Generation, hadn't left the show on the best of terms. TNG's earlier seasons suffered from many conflicts amongst the producers, writers, and the production staff. At the time, TNG was one of the more controversial shows someone in the industry could work for. Many avoided it like the plague. But with the addition of Michael Piller and Jerry Taylor in late season 2, the show really found its footing. Ira Stephen Bear was one of these many casualties during those earlier seasons. Although he was reluctant at first, Ira finally decided to accept Piller's offer. The contract stated that after season 2 of the show, Piller would hand the reins of the show to Ira. This, in my opinion, was one of the better decisions Rick Berman had made in his career. Ira would indeed take over the leadership role of Deep Space Nine after season 2. So now, with Ira Stephen Bear back on the saddle, the creation of the show could begin. Deep Space Nine was conceptually different from anything Star Trek had produced before from the very beginning. Unlike its predecessors, this was the first Star Trek series to take place on a space station other than a starship. Also, unlike TNG and TOS, DS9 was born out of conflict. Gene Roddenberry had very strict rules in the writers about how to write Star Trek. When Gene Roddenberry was alive, his philosophy was that the humans are a better species than the 24th century, and therefore have little to no conflict with each other. This is a big reason why Star Trek went through so many writers in its earlier seasons. The writers had to keep writing successful stories week to week with almost no personal drama amongst the main crew. They referred to this as Gene's box. Due to Gene's box, many scripts and stories were either drastically changed or rejected straight outright. Having little to no conflict amongst your crew made writing drama incredibly difficult. But with Gene now gone and out of the picture, it was time for Star Trek to flourish. This was the first Star Trek production created without Gene Roddenberry's involvement. Deep Space Nine starts out with many different conflicts on many different levels. This makes Star Trek actually feel real to me. The new crew and residents are in conflict with each other and the environment. The producers mention that the Cardassians like things in threes, and that their architecture and clothing style is a mix between pseudo-fascism and crustacean. Sisko is at conflict with himself and over the loss of Jennifer. The Cardassians are in conflict with the Federation and their presence on the station. Almost no one wants to be on the station after the Cardassians gutted and abandoned it. There is tension and conflict everywhere, and it's great. Because of this concept, we see all the characters learn and grow, and ultimately accept each other. Humans will always have conflict. It's in our nature. It's also necessary to help us grow. Don't get me wrong, I love everything Star Trek has produced with the exception of probably Star Trek Discovery, which I'm still on the fence with about many issues. But all the other Trek shows have that over-the-top happy-go-lucky Federation vibe, and to me at times it feels fake. It kind of gives you that happy Saturday morning cartoon type of feel. On a personal note, DS9's darker and grittier theme didn't sit well with a lot of fans. It still doesn't in some cases. People label DS9 as the only true spin-off of a Star Trek franchise, and in many ways, if you look at the facts presented, the theory does have merit. But in my opinion, this was not only the best Trek series, but also sci-fi series. DS9 opened the mythology behind Star Trek far more than any other Star Trek series did. In fact, DS9 broke many of the barriers that other Star Trek shows couldn't. DS9 also succeeded where the other Trek shows had failed, a prime example of this being the Ferengi. Even with its darker and grittier tone, DS9 still hit all the marks of a great Trek series. DS9 hit all the moral high points and philosophical concepts one would expect from a Star Trek series. It had both a cast of amazing actors and some friendly returning faces. At its very core, Deep Space Nine truly showed us what humanity was in the 24th century. We're not perfect. We're not infallible. We're not always clean. And the hard truth is that sometimes there just isn't a right choice. Deep Space Nine heavily reinforced these themes and ideals. In my opinion, no other Star Trek series reflected humanity better. This is the best analogy I've ever heard used to describe the relationship of Deep Space Nine to other Trek series. If you look at all the other Trek shows, especially The Next Generation, there is a utopian feel to them, a cleanliness. These are perfect evolved humans. There is very little conflict between them. They are always 100% focused on the mission ahead of them, and everything is prim and proper. Now, let's take a quick look at the DC comic universe. Take a look at Superman. He is the ultimate justice bringer. His personality and sense of morality are perfect for the most part. He is the superhero that other superheroes aspire to be. But for the sake of this comparison, I'll say he's more morally and mentally evolved. Very much in the same way as the crew of The Next Generation. He is the clean-cut, broad-shouldered beacon of justice and morality. Then, let's take a look at Batman, who is also part of the DC universe. Batman is also a superhero who fights in the name of good and justice. But Batman is nowhere near next to the morally bright beacon that Superman is fighting crime. He's dark, he's gritty, and often merciless. Batman was a hero entirely born out of conflict. Some of the methods that Batman employs to fight crime are borderline criminal in themselves, but the end result is the exact same. They go out, they fight crime, they apprehend criminals, and finally save the day. So, TNG and other Treks are more like Superman, and DS9 is more like Batman. Even though the original premise for Deep Space Nine was supposed to be a rifleman in space, the show far more resembles a Gunsmoke in space. That is a much better comparison. Now, onto the story. The story. Deep Space Nine was the third live-action series to be filmed for the Star Trek franchise. The series ran from January 3rd, 1993 until June 2nd of 1999. Deep Space Nine was also the first Star Trek series to run alongside another live Star Trek series production through its entirety. Unlike other Star Trek series, Deep Space Nine used its supporting cast of recurring characters heavily, often giving a supporting character multiple roles in multiple episodes. DS9 often explored other cultures and governments to a much higher degree than any of its other siblings. Needless to say, for a show that takes place mostly on a space station, they really did go boldly where no man or Trek had gone before. So, the year is 2369, or Stardate 46379.1. We do, however, get a quick glimpse into Sisko's past for a few minutes at the Battle of Wolf 359 in 2366 on Stardate 44002.3. Now, after a little research, Stardate 46379.1 translates into the May of the year 2369. So, our story begins in May in the year 2369. The story starts as the Cardassian Union withdraws its occupying force from the planet of Bajor. The Cardassians are a warp-capable species originally from the planet Cardassia Prime. Prior to becoming a galactic military power, Cardassia was home to some of the finest artists and architects in the Alpha Quadrant. But due to the planet and the sector's scarce natural resources, this once great empire fell into the ruins with famine and disease. Even at some of its lowest points, the Cardassian military continued exploiting its social and economic collapse to fund the Federation Cardassian War. Part of this war takes place in the TNG episodes Chain of Command, Parts 1 and 2. Cardassia, in search for more resources to sustain their government and galactic territory, began to branch out into the neighboring planets and sectors. This in turn led to what they call the occupation of Bajor. In 2319, 50 years prior to the beginning of Deep Space Nine, the Cardassian military made its way to the planet Bajor. The native species of the planet were called the Bajorans. The Bajorans are a deeply spiritual race of artisans who worship non-linear godlike creatures that live in an artificially created wormhole. Bajor was said to have made its first interstellar flight around Earth's 16th century. But by the time the Cardassian military arrived on Bajor, their technology was still a century ahead of the Bajoran people. Thus, the occupation of Bajor had begun. At first, the Bajorans put up little defense as the Cardassian military established a government on Bajor. The Cardassians would go on to devise a plan to strip mine all of Bajor's natural resources while establishing often genocidal forced labor camps comprised mostly of Bajoran nationals. Under the boot of the Cardassian Union, the weary and beaten Bajoran people began to form resistance groups and fight back against the Cardassians to reclaim Bajor. This horrific episode of Bajoran history lasted for 50 years into 2369. Cardassia was now under serious pressure and economic stress from both the Bajoran resistance as well as its ongoing war with the Federation of Planets. Cardassia then makes the decision to withdraw all its occupying forces from the Bajoran sector, relinquishing its hold on the planet and its people. Along with this transition, we get a Cardassian space station in orbit of Bajor. Originally named Turak Nor, the Cardassians used the station as an orbital mineral processing plant, as well as a forced slave labor camp. With the Cardassians now gone from the sector, the Federation takes over the station. They send in a team to fix and manage it, and then they rename the station to Deep Space Nine. This is where our story begins. And now, to introduce the main cast. The main cast. Okay, now let's take a look at the cast of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. First off, we have our leading man, Commander Benjamin Sisko, who is played by the amazingly talented Avery Brooks. Sisko, 2 years prior to being posted on DS9, lost his wife Jennifer at the hands of Locutus of Borg at the Battle of Wolf 359. Sisko managed to get their child Jake Sisko to safety, but Jennifer was killed directly after the initial attack. Now widowed and a single parent, Starfleet posts Commander Sisko to Deep Space Nine to oversee the addition of Bajor into the United Federation of Planets. Sisko starts the series as a commander, and then finally at the end of Season 3, he gets promoted to captain in the episode The Adversary. Avery Brooks is an American actor, director, singer, professor, and his career spans over 40 years. Brooks has acted and directed in roles in television, the movies, on the stage, and also in voice acting. Brooks, who is a native of Gary, Indiana, grew up in a musical household, which eventually shaped his desire to take up acting and directing. Brooks was the first African American to receive an MFA in acting and directing from Rutgers University. Other than his role as Captain Benjamin Sisko, Brooks is perhaps most well known for his role as Hawk from the novel to television series Spencer for Hire and its subsequent movies. This show and Avery Brooks' Hawk character would get a spin-off called A Man Called Hawk, which would only last for one season until it got canceled. Brooks would go on to direct 9 episodes of Deep Space Nine himself. Brooks has worked on such projects as Spencer for Hire, A Man Named Hawk, American History X, The Big Hit, and Roots, The Gift. For our second in command, we have Major Kira Nerys, who is played by the lovely Nana Visitor. Kira is a Bajoran national who was raised during the occupation of Bajor. From a very young age, Nerys was trained by the Bajoran resistance to fight and survive against the overstepping Cardassians. Nerys was trained in many forms of combat, from espionage to straight-out guerrilla warfare. After the Cardassian withdrawal, Kira joined the Bajoran militia and was awarded the rank of Major. She would get posted to Deep Space Nine as a liaison between the Bajoran Provisional Government and the United Federation of Planets. Nana Visitor is an American actress, and her career spans over 40 years. Visitor has acted on roles in television, the movies, and on stage. Born in New York City, Visitor grew up amongst a family of dancers and started her acting career quite young. Her career would start on Broadway and eventually lead to acting roles in television and in the movies. Other than playing the role of Major Kira Nerys, she is perhaps most well known for her role of Jean Ritter on the television show Wildfire. Visitor has worked on such projects as Ted 2, Friday the 13th, the reboot, Wildfire, Family Guy, Battlestar Galactica, MacGyver, Matlock, and Dark Angel. The Chief of Security on Deep Space Nine is Odo, who is played by master actor Rene Auberjonois. Odo is a shapeshifter with no recollection of his past or where he came from. Odo was discovered on an expedition to the Denorius Belt at a very young age. He was taken to Bajor to study, and under the guidance of Dr. Mora, learned how to communicate and take humanoid shape. Odo's innate sense of justice led him to Deep Space Nine, or Terak Nor at the time, to assume the role of Chief of Security. Rene Auberjonois is an American actor, director, and singer, and his career spans over 60 years. Auberjonois has acted in roles on television, the movies, on the stage, and in voice acting. A New York native, Auberjonois was born into a very artistic family. He began his acting career right out of college, eventually landing a role on Broadway. This would lead to roles in television and in the movies. Auberjonois' mother was an actual princess and was the great-great-granddaughter of Napoleon Bonaparte's youngest sister, Caroline Bonaparte. Her husband was Hakim Murat, who was the king of Naples. Murat was also one of Napoleon Bonaparte's marshals during the First French Empire. Auberjonois would go on to direct 8 episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Other than his role of Odo in Deep Space Nine, Auberjonois is perhaps best well known for his role as Clayton Endicott III on the television series Benson, or as Paul Lewiston in Boston Legal, which is probably my favorite courtroom and lawyer show ever, Denny Crane. Auberjonois has also played other roles in the Star Trek universe. You can see him here as Israel in the Enterprise episode Oasis, and also here as Colonel West in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Auberjonois has worked on such projects as Boston Legal, Benson, Madam Secretary, Batman Forever, Stargate SG-1, Snorks, Johnny Quest, and Pound Puppies. For the Chief of Engineering on the station, we get a familiar returning face from the Enterprise D, Chief Miles O'Brien. O'Brien is easily my favorite engineer in Star Trek. He is played by legendary Irish actor Colm Meaney. O'Brien is an engineer who started as a transporter chief aboard the Enterprise D under Captain Picard. O'Brien leaves the Enterprise to become the chief engineer of Deep Space Nine. Now in charge of the cleanup and repair operations of the gutted Cardassian station, O'Brien has his work cut out for him. Upon arrival, O'Brien's wife, Keiko, and his daughter Molly join him to live on the station. Colm Meaney is an Irish actor and his career spans over 40 years. Meaney has acted in roles on television, in the movies, on the stage, and also in voice acting. Born in Dublin, Ireland, Meaney began his craft of acting at the young age of 14. In 1978, he started getting into roles on television on the BBC. This also led to a significant movie career. Meaney is now considered an acting legend in Ireland. With 225 appearances in the Star Trek franchise, he is second to Michael Dorn's Worf for the most appearances by a character in Trek. Worf currently holds the title at 272 episodes. Other than his portrayal of Chief Miles O'Brien on Star Trek, Meaney is perhaps most well known for his role as Thomas Doctorant alongside Anson Mount in Hell on Wheels. Meaney has worked on such projects as Hell on Wheels, Stargate Atlantis, Gargoyles, Dick Tracy, Die Hard 2, Get Him to the Greek, and One Life to Live. For our new science officer, we get Jadzia Dax, who's played by the absolutely beautiful Terry Farrell. Jadzia is a Trill and lives in conjunction with the 300-year-old symbiont inside of her. In Trill society, to be merged or to be a host of a Trill symbiont is a very high honor and requires great dedication. The Trill who carries the symbiont gains the knowledge, personalities, and experiences from the symbiont's previous hosts, In Jadzia's case, her previous host was Curzon Dax. Curzon Dax was a Federation ambassador to the Klingon Empire. He represented the Federation at the Khitomer Conference. Curzon also happens to be great old friends with our leading man, Captain Benjamin Sisko. Terry Farrell is an American actress and fashion model, and her career spans over 35 years. Farrell has acted in roles on television and in the movies. Farrell is an Iowa native who started her career in modeling. Her career started when she would get invited to New York by a modeling company at the age of 16. After the meeting, she would receive her first contract. She began to study acting while modeling and eventually landed a part in the Rodney Dangerfield film Back to School in 1986. Farrell just recently married Adam Nimoy, who is the son of the legendary actor Leonard Nimoy, otherwise known as Mr. Spock. They married on what would have been the elder Nimoy's 78th birthday, on March 26, 2018. Besides her role as Jadzia Dax on Deep Space Nine, Farrell is perhaps most well known for her role on Becker as Regina Costas. Farrell has worked on such projects as Becker, Paper Dolls, The Cosby Show, Family Ties, Quantum Leap, and Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. For our Chief Medical Officer, we get Dr. Julian Bashir, who is played by the amazing Alexander Siddig. Bashir is a human Starfleet officer who just graduated from Academy. Bashir chooses to be posted at DS9, claiming it's the frontier and this is where heroes are made. Young and wet behind the ears, Bashir does his best to settle into the station. He instantly forms a crush on the new science officer, Jadzia Dax, as soon as they meet. Bashir eventually learns that he is way over his head where Jadzia is concerned. His arrogant demeanor and attitude in the first couple of seasons puts him at odds with some of the crew members as well. Alexander Siddig is an English actor and his career spans over 30 years. He has acted in roles on television, in the movies, on the stage, and also in voice acting. Originally born in Sudan, Siddig would grow up in England. He attended the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, or LAMDA for short. In 1990, Siddig would be discovered by Rick Berman for his performance in the movie A Dangerous Man, Lawrence of Arabia. This would lead to his role as Dr. Julian Bashir on Deep Space Nine. Post DS9, he has also had a decent acting career. His original name, which I will just post here on the screen, was changed to Alexander Siddig during the run of DS9. And here I thought my full name was long. Jeez. Other than his role as Dr. Julian Bashir, Siddig is perhaps most well known for his role as Ra's al Ghul on the television series Gotham, or Doran Martell in the critically acclaimed series Game of Thrones. Siddig has worked on such projects as The Game of Thrones, Gotham, Da Vinci's Demons, Peaky Blinders, 24, Reign of Fire, and Atlantis. The established community manager of the station and resident barkeep is Quark, who is played by master actor Armin Shimmerman. And like the rest of his species, he values monetary profit above all else. He runs a bar at the station's communal center called The Promenade. Quark has overseen this establishment even before Cardassia withdrew its forces from the Bajoran sectors. Quark's brother Ram and his nephew Nog live on the station and help him run the business. Since the Cardassians gutted the station beforehand, there's not much left on DS9. And because of this, Quark tries to withdraw from the station as well. Quark's nephew Nog ends up getting into some legal trouble on the station and ends up getting arrested. Sisko then uses Nog's freedom to blackmail Quark into staying on the station and keeping his business open. Quark then gets promoted to community leader by Commander Sisko. Quark always ends up at odds with the station security chief Odo. Quark is also one of 4 characters who have made an appearance in all of Star Trek's live-action productions based in the 24th century. The others are Gulliver, Morn, and Q. Armin Shimmerman is an American actor, voice actor, and author, and his career spans over 40 years. He has acted in roles on television, the movies, on the stage, and also in voice acting. Shimmerman is a native of New Jersey and grew up in a Jewish family. When he was 15, his family moved to Los Angeles and his mother enrolled him into an acting drama group. Shimmerman would graduate and move to New York to continue his acting career in theater. He eventually returned to Los Angeles and received 2 roles from CBS, launching his television career. Shimmerman has also played other roles in the Star Trek universe. You can see him here as Latak, one of the very first Ferengi we see on screen in The Next Generation, in the horrendous episode, The Last Outpost, and here as Damon Bractor in the Next Generation episode, Peak Performance. He also did some voice work as the Betazoid gift box on the Next Generation episode, Haven, and also as the educational program on Gaia in the Deep Space Nine episode, Children of Time. Other than his role of Quark on Deep Space Nine, Shimmerman is perhaps most well known for his role as Principal R. Snyder from the Joss Whedon series Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or Judge Brian Hopper from, yes, you guessed it, Boston Legal. Shimmerman has worked on projects such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Boston Legal, Stargate SG-1, Leverage, The Regular Show, and Ratchet and Clank. The son of Commander Benjamin Sisko is Jake Sisko, who is played by the talented Cirroc Lofton. Jake comes to the station because his father is posted here on assignment. Jake lost his mother when he was much younger in the Battle of Wolf 359. Jake struggles with living on the station and making it his new home. After meeting with Quark's nephew Nog, the two establish a deep relationship that carries out through the whole series. Jake also aspires to be a writer, going against his father's wishes for him to join Starfleet. Cirroc Lofton is an American actor, and his career spans over 25 years. He has acted in roles on television and in the movies. Lofton is a Los Angeles native who started acting at the very young age of 9. He made an appearance in a child's educational show and had a couple minor television roles and 1 movie credit. He would eventually land the role as Jake Sisko on Deep Space Nine and gain the title of the youngest person to ever be cast as a regular in a Star Trek series. Other than his role of Jake Sisko, Lofton is perhaps most well known for his role as Curtis Thorpe in the television series The Hoop Life. Lofton has worked on such projects as The Hoop Life, Beethoven, Seventh Heaven, CSI Miami, and Soul Food. The supporting cast. Quark's live-in brother and Nog's father is Rom, who is played by the great Max Grodenchek. Rom is the brother of Quark and also his indentured servant. Following the Ferengi code of conduct called the Rules of Acquisition, Quark exploits his brother and his earnings as Rom works to keep the bar in shape. Unlike his brother Quark, or most Ferengi, Rom is not the savvy businessman his species drives him to be. Nog explains that his father doesn't have the lobes for business. This is a term on Ferenginar that means one is not very good at acquiring profit, and a Ferengi with no profit is no Ferengi at all. What Rom lacks in business operations, he more than makes up for it with his mechanical skill and ingenuity, often using inappropriate and sometimes unsafe methods to maintain Quark's bar. Rom tends to have a very shy demeanor. With all this aside, Rom is a really great father to Nog, often supporting Nog's decisions, and protects Nog when a bad situation arises. Max Grodenchek is an American actor, and his career spans over 40 years. He has acted in roles in television, in the movies, on the stage, and also in voice acting. A New York native, Grodenchek was born into a Jewish family. Grodenchek, under his other name Michael Grodenchek, worked in a theater in the 1980s, where his performances landed him a television and movie career. Originally, he auditioned for the role of Quark, but fellow actor Armin Shimmerman got the role instead. Before acting, Grodenchek was a semi-professional baseball player and considered playing professional baseball instead of acting. Grodenchek also has played quite a few other roles in the Star Trek universe. You can see him here as Sobek in the TNG episode Captain's Holiday, here as Par Lenore in the TNG episode The Perfect Mate, and here's the first Grand Nagus Gint in the DS9 episode Body Parts. Other than his portrayal of Rom in Deep Space Nine, Grodenchek is perhaps most well known for his role as Wilmer in the movie The Rocketeer. Grodenchek has worked on such projects as The Rocketeer, Rising Sun, Bruce Almighty, CSI, and Sliders. Rom's son and Quark's nephew is named Nog, and he is played by the hilarious and talented Aron Eisenberg. Nog is a young Ferengi just trying to make his way on the station. He is heavily influenced by the old Ferengi traditions, and it tends to get him in trouble. Nog finds Jake Sisko early on, and they both become fast friends. Nog works at his Uncle Quark's bar on the promenade with his father Rom, often for less than desirable wages. Nog eventually tries to change the situation, seeing no future in the way he and his father are headed now. Nog, in my opinion, has one of the best story arcs on this show. Starting out as a common Ferengi criminal on the station, he often gets caught in petty schemes or plays pranks on people with Jake Sisko. Nog then decides to join Starfleet, and it changes him and his perspective outlook on the future. If anyone's story has a hope of element to it on this show, it's Nog's story. Aron Eisenberg is an American actor, producer, and director, and his career spans over 30 years. Eisenberg has acted and directed in roles on television, in the movies, on the stage, and also in voice acting. He also, along with fellow Star Trek actor Garrett Wang, used to host a video web series called The Alpha Quadrant. Born in Hollywood, California, Eisenberg grew up in a Jewish family. He was born with only one partially functioning kidney, which in turn stunted his growth. But this did not impede his desire to start a career in acting. Not in the least. Starting in the 1980s, Eisenberg would start his acting career appearing in movies and on television. This would lead to his role as Nog on Deep Space Nine. Even though he was 20 years old at the time of filming, he portrayed Nog as a teenager. He now works as a professional photographer. Eisenberg also has played another role in the Star Trek universe. You can see him here as the Kazon Kar in the Voyager episode Initiations. Other than his role as Nog on Deep Space Nine, Eisenberg is perhaps most well known for his role as Rajan Tektopoulos in the television series Blade of Honor. Eisenberg has worked on such projects as Blade of Honor, Amityville, The Evil Escapes, The Wonder Years, Prayer of the Roller Boys, Tales from the Crypt, and The Secret World of Alex Mack. Another familiar face we see on the station arriving from the Enterprise D is Keiko O'Brien, who is played by the lovely Rosalind Chow. Keiko is the wife of Chief Miles O'Brien. Her and Miles have a young daughter named Molly. She moves with Miles and Molly to Deep Space Nine when Miles gets posted to the station. Not happy about leaving the comforts of the Federation for the gutted Cardassian station, the O'Briens tend to get into a lot of arguments. Keiko eventually settles in and becomes the resident teacher of Deep Space Nine. Keiko previously lived, got married, and had her daughter on the Enterprise D under Captain Picard. Rosalind Chow is an American actress, and her career spans almost 50 years. She has acted in roles on television, in the movies, and on the stage. A native of California, Chow is a first-generation Chinese citizen. Her parents owned a pancake shop across from Disneyland in California, so Chow spent much of her younger years at Disney as an international tour guide. Her parents encouraged her to pursue a career in acting, and she did for a while, getting a few roles here and there. She stepped away from acting briefly to earn a degree in journalism from the University of Southern California. After this, Chow returned to acting, and she has been acting ever since. Other than her role of Keiko O'Brien, Chow is perhaps most well known for her role as Soon Ling Klinger in the television show Aftermath. Chow has worked on such projects as Aftermath, The OC, Kojak, Kung Fu, Different Strokes, Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23, Shameless, and Sin City Saints. And finally, I saved the best for last. But before I introduce this next character, I want to add a few things really quick. People could say all they want about the other Star Trek shows and how they are the best, blah, 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 blah. But none of the other shows have a character so multifaceted and shrouded in mystery as plain, simple Garak. Garak, in my opinion, is DS9's secret weapon. Garak is easily one of my favorite characters in Star Trek, period, and there's no one else like him. His story, in conjunction with an absolutely phenomenal acting performance by master actor Andrew Robinson, make Garak not so truly simple as he would elude you to believe. So, for our next character, we get Garak, who's played by master actor Andrew Robinson. Garak is a Cardassian tailor and shop owner who decides to stay behind when Cardassia withdrew its forces from the Bajoran sector. He continues to run his tailor shop on the promenade and develops a friendly relationship with the young Julian Bashir. The two often have lunch together and discuss random topics. Garak makes it known that he is a Cardassian loyalist with a fierce love of his homeworld. Bashir keeps digging through layer after layer of Garak's personality in their weekly lunch visits, but the young doctor soon finds that he has barely begun to scratch the surface of plain simple Garak. Andrew Robinson is an American actor, director, author, and professor, and his career spans over 50 years. Robinson has acted and directed in roles on television, the movies, and on the stage. He was the former director of the Master of Fine Arts program at the University of Southern California. Robinson is a New York native who lost his father in World War II at the age of 3. His mother then moved him to Connecticut, and with the help of her family, they raised young Andrew. Robinson began acting while in high school and in college in theater. He also joined the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, much like fellow actor Alexander Siddig. His original intention was to become a journalist, but he decided on acting after receiving a Fulbright scholarship. His first professional acting roles would come in the theater. Not too long after this, he was cast in Dirty Harry as the main antagonist, the Scorpio Killer, which gained him much attention. This would lead to many more acting roles in television and film for Robinson. He would eventually join the cast of Deep Space Nine, and during the series' run, he would go on to direct an episode of Deep Space Nine and 2 episodes of Voyager. Robinson also wrote 2 Deep Space Nine pocketbooks. Other than his role as Garak, Robinson is perhaps most well known as Frank Ryan from the television series Ryan's Hope. Robinson has worked on such projects as Ryan's Hope, Dirty Harry, Bonanza, Kojak, Barnaby Jones, The X-Files, and Law and Order. So, if you couldn't tell already, Star Trek Deep Space Nine is by far my most favorite sci-fi franchise out of all of the space sci-fi franchises. Deep Space Nine is filled with all the good elements that make a great Star Trek show. There's a few episodes that slip through the cracks here and there, but from beginning to end, Deep Space Nine is a pretty solid series. The actors, writers, and producers, along with the production crew, were all phenomenal in creating this series. Not to mention that Deep Space Nine stands up pretty well in today's serialized TV format. Even now, 25 years later, many fans consider this to be the best Star Trek series, and I am among them. And also on a side note, the show's producer and showrunner, Ira Steven Behr, kickstarted a campaign along with many fans to film a documentary about the show. The documentary itself, called What We Left Behind, is phenomenal. I have seen it in the theater on May 13th when it dropped, and let me say, it blew me away. And if you didn't get a chance to see it in the theater on May 13th, it's going to be released on DVD on August 6th. And if you are a DS9 fan, do yourself a favor and see this. This documentary is phenomenal. From start to finish, it will grip you. All the actors, all the producers, the writers, they put a lot of love and a lot of attention into this documentary for the fans. It is a must-see if you are a Deep Space Nine fan. So, with that all being said, I hope you enjoyed my video, the introduction to Deep Space Nine. I hope I taught you a few things about the show, and please stay tuned for my next Ensign Reviews video on Deep Space Nine series premiere episode, Emissary. Until then, this has been Ensign Reviews with your host, Ensign Rickey, here in the lower decks, your resident YouTube red shirt, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Peace.